Hey guys, my name is Matthew and this is my review of The Four Winds by Kristen Hannah. Here we go. The Four Winds is a book that is primarily set in the Dust Bowl era of the early 1930s. It follows the character Elsa, who moves her family from Texas, kind of Dust Bowl stuff, into California and workers' rights type stuff. Two kind of depressing topics, really. And it feels a lot like Grapes of Wrath until about halfway through, where it takes a little bit of a different turn. It's all told from a female protagonist perspective. In this review, I'm going to be listing some of my observations of the book, starting with the things that I liked the most and working my way down to a couple things I didn't enjoy as much about the book. At the end of this review, I'll give a recommendation for who the book was written for. Now, one of the absolute highlights of this book is the characterization that Kristen does. It is absolutely spectacular. Kristen does a wonderful job, not so much with individual characters, although she does a good job with that too, but one thing I really loved about this book is the way that characters have relationships with each other. It's like Kristen is a proponent of systems theory, and she really does a great job of understanding systems, understanding why people interact the way they do, and she doesn't think it's because of an individual and their personal motivations, but it's because of the way their system works, or in this case, the families work. There's something really cool about the way that the characters interact with each other, more so than even the characters themselves. Although, like I said, she also does a good job of just writing individual characters. I also really loved the setting of this book. Not so much the setting as in I love that time period, but I love the way that Kristen writes this setting. A lot of times when you're dealing with historical fiction, it feels like people either understate it or they super overstate it, and the setting is super in your face the entire book. In this book, Kristen does an amazing job of painting a picture of the 1930s in a way that I feel like I was really there. I feel like I really understood what was happening in that small town that they lived in Texas, as well as in the journey in California. I just feel like she researched that obviously really well, but then she wrote it really well as well. The setting really came alive in this book, and I really appreciated the way she did that. The book itself is also really interesting. I'd classify it as kind of a page turner, although the topic doesn't feel very page turner-ish. I just say that to say that the plot elements were all there. There were a couple times when I was like, man, I wonder what was happening. Like she kind of dropped something earlier, and I'm like, I wonder if that's going to come up again, or I'd feel a little bit unsettled if she never brought that up. And she brought it up again at exactly the right times to where I wasn't really missing it. It was like, man, I wonder if she's going to bring up the time, how Elsa interacts with her father again. And then a couple pages later, there it is. So she really did a good job at just making the plot move well. The characters did the right things. The book continues moving, and at no point did I feel like, man, I don't want to read anymore of this book, even though it's kind of a sad book. We'll get to the sadness of it in just a minute. Another thing I appreciated about this book is the educational nature of it, just because it is historical fiction, and not everything in this book was perfectly historical. We'll get to that in a second as well, but it was really written in a way that it gives you a good glimpse of the history. So you could actually learn a lot about what was happening in the Dust Bowl era, what was going on for families. It is told from that kind of a perspective, and it's really educational in that way. In some ways, it kind of felt like Grandpa telling you stories about how things were going, but from a little bit more reliable of a narrator. I also don't want to overstate this part too much, but it was really relevant to some things that were going on right now, especially the second half of the book. I think it ties into some things that are happening in our culture, in our nation now. And I think she did that intentionally, and she may have some political motivations and whatever. I don't want to tie too much into that, but no matter where you lie in the spectrum, I think you can see some ways that this story and what was happening in the 1930s ties to some things that are going on in current day America now. Pointing to that, I do just want to say I actually really loved how Kristen made a note at the end of the book saying that this is historical fiction, meaning that she did kind of take some liberties with a few things, and she kind of lets us know that. I think a lot of people who read and write historical fiction, they have a tendency to think, oh yeah, this is all perfect history and this is really telling a great story. And I appreciate that Kristen isn't trying to mislead people into thinking she's written history, but instead this is historical fiction. There are elements of it that she did change, even historically, like she's done her research and she said, hey, I'm changing that bit just a bit because it fits with the story more. And I really appreciate that she gave us that note. A couple things I didn't like about this book as much. The first one was, it is borderline depressing. This is a heavy book. Okay, this isn't like a light read, and I'd say that if you're the type who tends to fall in, like you take in media and you become that media, like if you're like, oh man, I read a depressing book and I become depressed for a little while, this might not be the greatest book for you. There were times in reading this book where it was like, oh man, I gotta kind of push through, and I wouldn't read multiple books like this in a row because it's a hard read, and in a good way, but it's a hard read. One thing I didn't like, and I already kind of mentioned that she left this note about it, but there are some things that happen in the book that seem really implausible to me, especially towards the end. So I guess that's it. Just some of the plot points seemed implausible to me, and I don't love that part of historical fiction. It's like, oh man, okay, well, I get it, but I don't love it. So that's just something. Before I give my recommendation for this book, I do just want to point out the description below. It has an Amazon affiliate link in it, and it links directly to the book. It doesn't cost you any extra, but if you use it, it would really help out our channel a lot. Now, as far as who I recommend this book for, I think it's a great book. It was really well written, it's really interesting, it's got a lot of great elements. So if you like historical fiction, I think this is a great book for you. You should love this book, actually. If you're into historical fiction, especially from that time period, it's really well written. It's just a good book. The only people I really say just maybe stay away from it are people who are dealing with maybe mental health issues and the kind of depression stuff. It could still be an important read for you educationally, but for your mental health, it may not be as good. So if you don't like the heavier books or books that don't have a happy ending, this book doesn't have a lot that's really happy in it. There are some happy moments, but they're few and far between and surrounded by hard things. So this has been my review of The Four Winds by Kristen Hannah. If you've enjoyed this review, please feel free to like and subscribe and use the affiliate link that I mentioned that's in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, stay safe out there.